Tune into the truth frequency.
Your protection from deception. This is Truth Frequency Radio.
And greetings, Earth Explorers. Welcome to X Squared Radio. I'm your host, Brooks Agnew, coming to you live from an undisclosed location east of the Appalachian Mountains. This is where the past meets the future. In here, the results are always positive. We may go a little past your imagination, but have no fear. You will be safely traveling with us. Let me give you my Religion of Peace report to begin with. In the last 7 days, the Religion of Peace conducted 23 attacks. In these 23 attacks, they killed 157 innocent people. They injured 68 innocent people. They conducted one suicide blast and spread their mayhem across 7 countries. All this from the Religion of Peace. Okay, let's get right to it. I want to give you a Civil War update from a little different perspective tonight. I'll have little bits and pieces of it as we go through the night because you need to stay informed. I woke up in a dream the other day on the beach. It was after the Civil War. No, I don't mean 1864. I mean, it was 2024. This war has been planned for a long time by an entity that sits in the basement of the global syndicate. That actually is the highest position in the organization, the basement. It is cold and dank and reeks of old skin and stale air. The power that lives there is greater than anything this world has ever seen. It has consumed hundreds of worlds like Earth, but it has never before faced humans. That is the challenge. You see, we humans are also timeless beings in a different sort of way. We each possess an eternal spirit inside of us that is an integral part of the physical universe. Our core being is able to withstand pure light, unlike the dark force in the basement of the syndicate. That being is timeless in the sense that it lives through the ages in one body. We take on thousands and sometimes millions of bodies to reach our full potential. The dark entity has a goal and has developed proven methods for reaching that goal. But I diverge. I want to tell you about the war first, and later on I'll tell you about the goal. There is much to build up to the actual conflict of 2021 that takes more than 93 years from the American government formation all the way until now. And I don't mean the revolutionary period of 1787. I mean the thing that actually brought people to violence. And it is actually quite remarkable. You see, in 2020, the president realized that removing the syndicate's generals and soldiers from the American government would probably kill the patient. That is to say, there were so many of them on so many levels that prosecuting them for their crimes would plunge the country into anarchy. So many senators, congressmen, judges, governors, mayors, and even city council members were guilty of corruption on a scale that even a movie script wouldn't be able to capture. That arresting them all would actually cripple the country. Their propaganda machine that the syndicate runs was drenching the airwaves and cyber waves with warnings that the president was destroying the actual democracy. And in actuality, he was doing just that. You see, the syndicate had set up the largest government in world history for the express purpose of choking humans slowly to death. And no matter how hard they worked or how productive they became, the government would always demand that much more. It was like a giant karmic credit card that could never be paid off. Trump was actually tearing down the government they had built over the period of 93 years. The tax money that was being laundered through more than 200 cities in 28 states was staggering, and it was making the syndicate wealthy and powerful beyond measure. And when President Trump figured out how they were doing it, he stopped the flow of money, and their empires began crumbling. And one by one, the generals began dying or being killed. The Democrats could not field a nominee during the primary of 2020. The 2020 Democrat convention was brokered, and it turned into a corporate version of let's make a deal. Donald Trump had done a masterful job of labeling every single Democrat a socialist, and they seemed to wear the brown uniform very well until the convention. They went to the floor at war. The place was packed with people, inside and out. And suddenly, the Clintons and the Obamas showed up and moved to put the wives in as president and vice president. Oh, you haven't seen this coming. No. Q warned us about it. Remember, he said, watch the wives. Watch the wives. This is what happened. They decried the socialists, and they stood like icons of moderate America. They quickly performed a coup on their own party, and they took the nomination away from the other candidates as though they were not even there. The debates could not have been more divided. Donald Trump was on one side and anti-Trump was on the other side. Trump preached love and growth, and the Democrats preached impeachment and corporate greed gone amok on the other side. The rich were pitted against the poor, blacks against whites, Christians against Muslims, students against banks, immigrants against citizens, all genders against heterosexuals. The battle lines could not have been drawn more clearly. The election of 2020 was a landslide like no one had ever seen. Every precinct was overwhelmed with people wanting to vote American. City after city and city after city closed their polling stations, claiming they were afraid of the energy in the massive lines. More than 100 million people tried to vote that day to re-elect Donald Trump, and the press couldn't spin it away. Thousands of independent reporters were showing a patriotic energy like no one had ever seen before. Nothing could stop them. And then it happened. As the last polling stations closed on the West Coast, the syndicate's news sources began to incite the crowds. It was orchestrated from a single, well-crafted script. The first flash happened around midnight on the West Coast. The second a few moments later in Tennessee. The last one was in the middle of North Carolina about half an hour later. The grid was interrupted with a series of transformer explosions and high-tension line fires. It had been 2 years when I woke up on that beach, and nobody could tell me if it was a series of small nukes or just a dozen RPGs fired into substations, but the result was the same. By dawn, on the East Coast, more than 2 million people were dead. Virtually everyone on some sort of medical support in a hospital, nursing home, or clinic died within hours. The black-clad mobs attacked the banking districts in over 200 sanctuary cities as soon as the lights went out, as though they were waiting for the signal. They smashed windows and robbed everything that wasn't nailed down. The police didn't lift a finger. They all stayed home and guarded their own families. There was no fuel, no phones, and no lights across great swaths of the country. The first wave came through without opposition. The next morning, armed Americans showed up to protect their cities. It was heartbreaking to hear and to see. The dark entity ruling from behind the scenes must have been laughing loudly for the next few weeks. His mobs of thugs and thieves were already in a dark place, headed for a dark corner of hell. But he succeeded in drawing millions of other Americans into that hell as well, by convincing them to use violence to repel the attacks. The ones who fell were almost exclusively kids. Very few were parents themselves. After those first few weeks of battle, the revenge cycle began. The friends of all the ones who died in the first days wanted revenge. All wars and feuds start out this way and find a place where they never really end. You know, right up until the day the first shots were fired in self-defense, the Americans in the South called the Americans in the North Yankees, as a long-lived effect of the first Civil War in the United States. The only thing that stopped China from invading while America was dark, which I think was the original plan, is that the 200 million Chinese rebelling against the government stopped them, and they had their hands full. The Middle East was the same way. Hundreds of revolts took place all over the world at the same time, and the result was the same everywhere. The globalist government was torn down. The people were set free, but at a terrible cost. But now, this calm, clear morning on the beach in the year 2022, 2024, the future looks amazing. The love around the world has never been stronger. The grids and networks, they're back up. And the propagandists have all been removed. The goodness and bounty of the earth is no longer hoarded away from the poor. No one is hungry. No one is afraid. And every dream is now possible. To infinity and beyond. Sounds like a fantasy. Occasionally I'm able to drift into the future and look back at the past and see how things unfolded. It was very accurate in the book Remembering the Future, The Physics of the Soul and Time Travel that I wrote in 2007. It's not something that I can master. It's not something that I can control. It happens every now and then. These are just things that I can see. So, news from the future. And it means that we can choose another future. It doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen. It's not a prophecy. It is a conditional prediction. If we allow ourselves to be drawn into violence against those who will be sent against us, we will go to the same place they will. We have to meet these armies of masked thugs with bats and signs and clubs and hammers with bigger numbers, but no guns. These kids don't deserve to die. They're being used. They're being used by the global syndicate to accomplish a task, and that is anarchy. So please, if you're within earshot of tonight's broadcast, don't fall for that. Don't think that you have to go out on the streets and fight them. We can contain them. They're largely unarmed. Yes, they're confused and they're mixed up and they're whipped up into anger and a frenzy, but that will pass. That will pass. There's no win for them. You understand? There's no win. There's no patriotism in them. There is in us. And we know what America is really about. And it's not about civil war. That being said, there are things leading up to this, as I said earlier. In China, first it was Baoshang Bank, and then it was the Bank of Jinzhou. And then 2 months ago, China's Hengfang Bank, with 1.4 trillion yuan in assets, quietly failed and was just as quietly nationalized. This is how it's done. Today, a fourth prominent Chinese bank was on the verge of collapse under the weight of its bad loans. Only this time, the failure was far less quiet, as depositors of the rural lender swarmed the bank's retail outlets, demanding their money in an angry demonstration of what Beijing is terrified of the most. And the same here, and the same in Europe. A bank run. Local business leaders, political cadres, and banking executives rallied Thursday at the main branch of Henan Yishuan Rural Commercial Bank just outside the central Chinese city of Luoyang, where they stood one by one before a microphone to pledge their backing for the bank, as smiling employees brandished wads of cash before television cameras to demonstrate just how much cash, literally, the bank had. It was China's latest and most desperate attempt yet to protect stability and reassure the public that all was well, after rumors spread that the bank's chairman was in trouble and the bank was on the brink of insolvency. However, and the Wall Street Journal reports this, it wasn't enough for 31-year-old Li Shui, Li Shu, who showed up for the third day, Thursday, to withdraw thousands of yuan of her mother's life savings after hearing from fellow villagers that Yishuan Bank, which is the largest lender in Yishuan County by the number of branches and capital, and it is also a member of PBOC's deposit insurance system, according to the local government, they were going under. And so she was going to get her mother's money out of the bank. And just like any self-respecting Ponzi scheme, and you all know how this operates if you've ever gone to the bank with a large check to cash it on a Wednesday or a Thursday, it ain't happening. It ain't happening because your local bank, they don't have the money. You might be able to do it on a Friday because they have payroll cash there, but not during the week. You'll have to make an order and come back the next day as if they can move money to that branch. Sometimes you can go to the main branch and get a check cash like that because they'll have cash in the vault, but not the locals. They extract all that money to the central bank, the cash. Anyway, the bank managers tried to persuade her to keep her money with them until March, when her mother's 3-year deposits would mature, yielding more than 10,000 yuan in interest. And then, just like any Ponzi scheme, to sweeten the offer, the bank managers also offered her even higher yielding products, plus supermarket gift cards, just to keep her money in the bank. The bank needs the money, just like American banks. Hold on one moment. American banks need cash on hand in order to keep loans out, especially to cover the bad loans. That's why they're there. The cash reserves are supposed to be at least 10% of the loan amount of the bank, because the prediction is that no more than 10% of your loan portfolio will fail at any one time, and you need to have the money to be able to back those failed loans. If more than 10% go bad, you have a real problem. So the idea is to make good loans, make sure that the people are, quote, creditworthy, make sure their source of income is stable, make sure that the asset backs the security, like a first mortgage on a home or a loan on a car, but a student loan or an unsecured loan or a credit card loan, there's nothing to back it, nothing but air. And so you have to have the money to be able to back if those people don't pay their loans back. It's a big deal. So, and we've documented this before on this program. In recent months, China's banking sector has been dogged by a sudden surge in, let's just call it, liquidity concerns, particularly among the smaller regional banks. And it's the same thing here in this country. In this country, the regional banks, and I don't mean the big ones like Wells Fargo or Chase or Morgan, they're global multi-trillion-dollar banks. I'm talking about the regional banks. I'm talking, things like PNC, things like, First Trust or Community Bank, 20, 30 branches. You have them in your state. Some of you have accounts with those regional banks. These regional banks are the ones that are having liquidity problems, and usually to solve it, because at the end of each day, you have to have that cash reserve on hand, or the regulators can take action against your bank. And so what they do is they go to the overnight window and they borrow money at the overnight window. Let's borrow money overnight, make sure they got enough cash on hand, and the next day they pay it back. Well, what many of you don't know is that for the last couple of months, not quantitative easing, what the Obama administration was doing, which was pumping about $85 billion into the bond market to shore up the dollar. And of course, it made the dollar very strong, but it also was all artificial, and it made a big problem with inflation. This is overnight loans. And we're talking sometimes $80 billion, not a month, $80 billion a day. $80 billion a day are being set aside to cover these overnight lending situations. Now, and I know it's just a matter of time before, everything doesn't go right, and they're not able to pay that loan back the next day, and that overnight loan goes bad. Yeah, and that's when we have a real problem. Prudently, Beijing has been careful not to announce any takeovers, which we call that nationalization. That's when the government moves in and says, okay, give us the airplane. We want this bank. We'll take over the bank and we'll step in and put our assets behind it and save it. That's what's been going on in China. It did go on in this country a few times. It hasn't lately, but it doesn't mean that the signs aren't there. So what Beijing is doing is bringing in these state-owned banks and asset management firms, as well as an arm of the nation's sovereign wealth fund, to inject fresh capital and stabilize these wobbly regional banks, as it did most recently in the case of Hengfeng. Now, try as Beijing might, and Beijing is just a small Washington. Washington has a lot of power around the world. Beijing doesn't have a lot of power around the world, but they have a tremendous amount of power in China. I don't know if you've ever been to China. I've been many times, sat across the table from billionaires before and negotiated. And it always comes down to the same thing. Yes, of course, they're billionaires, but they're also prisoners. They can't leave the country. Their money can't leave the country. They can't invest in things outside the country. They can't move their money. It has to stay in China for this reason. We got the impression at these meetings that the billionaires were allowed to be billionaires as long as they were supportive of the Chinese government. As soon as they become independently minded or want to do something else with their $1 billion beside what the Chinese government will allow them to do with their money, then they are summarily dispatched. I'm going to be kind in saying that. The good news is that troubled banks account for just about 4% of the total assets in China's banking system. That being said, their banking system is quite large, and 4% is a lot of money. And this is according to an estimate by the S&P Global that included poor quality rural institutions flagged by the Chinese central bank. And we have the same thing happen in this country, but I'm just trying to tell you how close we are to the threshold. In the network, we call this corporate debt. It's sort of brought on by cheap money. When you can borrow cheap money, and I mean cheap at 0.5% or sometimes 0% interest, what these corporate executives are doing is they're borrowing the money to buy back their own company's stock. Why do they do that? Well, so they don't have to divide the profits with the shareholders. They can keep all the profits. But there's another reason. And right before we go to break, I want to let you know this. They're selling their own stock into the market, and they're buying it with the bank's money. They're making themselves wealthy. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. Don't go away. More X Squared Radio coming at you right after this. And don't forget, this is a 3-hour program, so you YouTubers hang out through the commercial. We'll be right back.
Extendivite, a 7-herb combination made from garlic, cayenne, hawthorn, bilberry, ginkgo biloba, valerian, and milk thistle. Extendivite feeds our body with the right nutrients to keep us healthy. Just listen to what Arthur has to say.
I was just calling to tell you what a great product you have. I had used this about 10 years ago after I had congestive heart failure. And it fixed me up and got me going for the last 10 years. Lately, I've been having heart trouble again. So I placed another order because this was the only thing that ever worked. And I just wanted to let you know that you have a great product.
To order, call 1-877-928-8822. That's 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendovite.
Hey folks, guess what the number one phrase that Life Change Tea receives by email? You ready? We love this tea. We love this tea. Time after time, week after week, we love this tea. Life Change Tea gives you more energy, a beautiful cleansing, and fulfills its slogan perfectly. The tea that makes you go. So if you want to be on your health game, log on to getthetea.com and order Life Change Super Strength Tea. Packages come in a 1-month supply, and when you brew this stuff, wait until you see the results. Aren't we all about the results? And with a lot of people's health struggling, we can use a little bit of help. Doctors will tell you disease starts in the gut. So log on to getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Be our next email saying, I love this tea. I love this tea. Get the tea at getthetea.com. Helping America one tea bag at a time.
He was the deputy director of MI6, Britain's most senior diplomat. He was knighted by the Queen and in charge of thousands of highly trained spies. But he was also a member of the Paedophile Information Exchange. He had 45 diaries full of sex fantasies with children. His friend was the private secretary of Margaret Thatcher. He strangled a child and hit another with his car. He raped young boys and organized orgies with children for other politicians.
The Enigma Channel, intelligent television for planet Earth. EnigmaTV.com.
hate. No hype. No fear. We are TFR Frequency Radio.
All right, welcome back to X Squared Radio. I want to talk a little bit about the Green New Deal. Green New Dealers have convinced themselves that our planet faces an imminent existential man-made climate cataclysm that can be prevented solely and simply by government edicts replacing fossil fuels with biofuel, wind, solar, and battery energy. That's basically it. Well, yes, there's a matter of $34 trillion that it's going to cost, but let's continue. You see, they achieve this state of absolute certainty largely by propagating constant scare stories while ignoring and suppressing contradictory evidence and viewpoints. And they deliberately and deceptively talk about carbon pollution. Hello? Carbon is soot. Carbon is cornflakes. It's what our cars, factories, and power plants now emit in very tiny quantities over the planet. The honest, accurate term is carbon dioxide is the colorless, odorless, invisible gas that we exhale and plants need in order to grow. They use the tiny but growing 0.04% of the Earth's atmosphere, that is CO2, to grow. They make sugar out of it. That's what they do. And it gives them greater resistance to droughts. They are climate change deniers, these plants, who say Earth's climate is stable and can be kept stable by controlling minor factors, human carbon dioxide and methane emissions, and ignoring water vapor, the dominant greenhouse gas, by the way, and fluctuations in solar energy, which I'm sorry to say we can't do anything about, cosmic rays, clouds, oceanic circulation, volcanoes. We're going to talk a little bit more about volcanoes later on tonight. Planetary orbits and other powerful natural forces that have brought climate changes throughout the ages. So we're used to this. We see this a lot. It's not that crazy. And these greenies insist that even another half-degree increase in planetary temperatures since the Earth emerged from the little ice age, that would have been about, the year 1350, somewhere around there, it would be cataclysmic. And the bottom line is that this is absurd. They also rely on computer models that project rapidly soaring temperatures, but already claim average global temperatures should be 0.9 degrees Fahrenheit higher than they actually are, according to satellite and weather balloon measurements. Climate crisis true believers say, and I'm sure you've heard this on the news in the last week, that tornadoes and hurricanes are becoming more frequent and intense. But in reality, from 1950 to 1984, the U.S. averaged 55 violent, that would be F4 to F5, tornadoes every single year. But over the next 33 years, that would be from 1985 until last year, only 35 per year. And in 2018, for the first time in recorded history, not one single solitary F4 or F5 tornado touchdown anywhere in the United States. It's never, ever happened before. And this is due to rising CO2 levels? This is due to carbon? Seriously? Okay, from 1920 to 2005, 52 Category 3 to 5 hurricanes made U.S. landfall. That's an average of 1.6 a year, okay? That's a long time, 1920 to 2005, all right? That's 85 years. And then from October 2005 until August of 2007, a record 12 years, zero Category 3 to 5. Didn't happen. None. Harvey and Irma ended that hurricane drought in 2017, but were hardly unprecedented in their intensity or rainfall. Didn't really destroy a lot, didn't really put a lot of rain down compared to other hurricanes. And was that brought on by CO2 levels? No. And the Washington Post reported that the Arctic Ocean is warming up, and in some places, seals are finding the water too hot. I hate to tell you this, but the Washington Post actually published that in 1922. And explorers wrote about Arctic ice cycles long before that. I quote, "We were astonished by the total absence of ice in the Barrow Strait." That was Sir Francis McClintock in 1860. Whereas at this time, it was in 1854, still frozen up. And that's the way it is today. In 2018, the entire Arctic refroze solid, and it's still frozen as we speak. As to the continental USA weather, a commentator said, and I quote, "Snows are less frequent and less deep, and the rivers scarcely ever freeze over now." That was Thomas Jefferson, by the way, in 1799. And the late 1970s man-made global cooling scare was replaced by today's global warming crisis. So what does it do? Why do they do this? Why do they put out this scary stuff? Is it to make you go to the store and buy more bread and milk and beer? Well, I'm going to get to that in just a second. It actually has nothing to do with that. After rising some 400 feet since the last ice age ended about 12,000 years ago, oceans are rising at 7 to 10 inches per century. That's a minimal threat to coastal communities, some of which are more seriously threatened by land subsidence, including Chesapeake Bay, Hampton Roads in Virginia, Houston, and Miami. There has been no increase in the rate of sea level rise in over 100 years. Seawaters cannot become more acidic. They are slightly alkaline. They may be getting slightly less alkaline depending on where and when pH levels are measured, but they are not becoming acidic. So coral bleaching can result from pollution, but is most naturally caused by coral animals ejecting their symbiotic zooxanthellae single-celled dinoflagellates when seawaters become warmer or colder. Corals replace them with new species better adapted to the new temperatures, and then recover their former color and glory as they have in Australia's Great Barrier Reef, Hawaii's reefs, and elsewhere. Polar bears are at their highest population level ever. Since records have been kept. There are as many as 31,000 polar bears. It would not be a good time to go to the Arctic and pitch your tent and go camping because you're food to them. They have survived multiple ice ages, interglacial periods, and warming episodes. They are hardly endangered. Oh, he's a climate denier. We face no climate crisis, Earth explorers. There's no unprecedented warming. There's no climate or extreme weather threat, man-made or natural. Equally important proposals to replace fossil fuels with biofuel, wind, solar, and battery power would be far more ecologically destructive than their climate crisis. and would severely harm food supplies, nutrition, jobs, living standards, health, and lifespans in rich and poor countries alike. For the United States alone, replacing 100% of U.S. gasoline and petrochemical feedstocks with ethanol would require some 700 million acres of biotech corn. That's not edible corn. That's 4 times the land area of Texas turned into biofuel corn plantations or soy canola farms for biodiesel, leaving little land for food and wildlife. So, let's just suppose we were going to wind power, let's say, to replace the 3.9 billion megawatt hours of electricity that Americans consumed in the year 2018. Coal and gas-fired backup power plants, natural gas for home heating, and coal and gas for factories and gasoline-powered vehicles. We'll also use wind turbines to generate enough extra electricity every windy day, of course, to charge batteries for just 7 straight windless days. We'll also account for electricity loss along lengthy transmission lines and every time we charge and discharge the batteries. As we erect turbines in steadily lower quality wind locations, instead of generating full nameplate power maybe 33% of the year, on average, they will do only 16% of the year. Instead of the 58,000 we have now, the United States would need some 14 million 400-foot tall turbines, each one capable of generating 1.8 megawatts of full capacity when the wind is blowing at the proper speed. Each turbine would need about 120 acres of open space and access roads. BP's 50,000-acre Fowler Ridge Wind Energy Factory in Indiana has a total of, this would require 1.7 billion acres, and that's actually 10 times the area of Texas or most of the lower 48 states, plus thousands of miles of new transmission lines. We have 10 times the state of Texas. That's big. That's big. You know, Texas is big. Everything's bigger in Texas. My truck comes from Texas. Their bird butchering blades would basically wipe out raptors, other birds, and bats across much of the nation. Would Extinction Rebellion go apoplectic or not give a spotted owl hoot since wind turbines are so eco-friendly? Manufacturing those wind turbines would require something on the order of about, 15 billion tons of steel. You would also have copper and rare earth metals, and you have to have concrete, petroleum-based composites, to make the blades, to make the rosins. You got to have gravel. You got to have other raw materials, and extracting them would require a 100-fold increase in global mining, removing hundreds of billions of tons of earth and rock overburden, and crushing and processing tens of billions of tons of copper and iron ore. Imagine the cumulative land use, eminent domain, property rights, environmental and wildlife impacts. The earth would look like hell after we got done. And by the way, just so you know, the CRL has entered into a deal with 3 Wyoming wind farms to dispose of decommissioned blades. Oh, you didn't know that, did you? Well, you see, those big 90-foot blades, they wear out because the grit in the wind wears away at the blades. Yeah, once that thing's built, those blades don't just stay there. They have to be taken down and relaminated. And they can only be relaminated so many times, and then they just basically come to pieces. But you see, they're 90 feet long. And this is a big problem. Waste management experts estimate they'll take hundreds of years for them to biodegrade because they're made of artificial rosins and layers after layers of fiberglass. All of this is synthetic now. Hundreds of giant windmill blades are being shipped to a landfill in Wyoming to be buried because they simply can't be recycled, you see. Local media reports, let's see here if I can find this, several wind farms in the state are sending over 900 unreusable blades to the Casper Regional Landfill to be buried. While nearly 90% of old or decommissioned wind turbines, like the motor housing, can be refurbished or at least crushed, the fiberglass windmill blades present a problem due to their size and their strength. You see, the crushing equipment is not large enough to crunch these down into small pieces. Prior to burying these cumbersome, sometimes 300-foot-long blades, the landfill has to cut them up into smaller pieces on site and then stack them in order to save space during transportation. You can't just drive a 300-foot blade down the road. You can't make a turn on some of these freeways with a 300-foot-long blade. They have to be specially transported to get there. Now, to make matters worse, the blades aren't exactly compostable. They don't biodegrade. The Casper Solid Waste Manager tells Wyoming News now they'll take hundreds of years to biodegrade. Using batteries to replace coal and gas-fired backup power plants for intermittent weather-dependent and these wind facilities and solar facilities would require some 1 billion 100 kilowatt-hour, 1,000-pound lithium and cobalt-based Tesla battery packs. And still, more mining and more raw materials and more rare earth metals. And that doesn't include extra battery storage for the cars, the trucks, and the buses that the Green New Dealers want to replace with electric vehicles. Climate crisis true believers proudly proclaim themselves environmental socialists, while obstinately ignoring and suppressing these climate and energy realities that I just shared with you. They certainly promote a political economic system under which central government controls the means of production, right? While limiting private property rights or replacing them with, well, let's just call it communal ownership. It's actually government ownership. You won't own a damn thing. But what they really want, and I'm trying to help you see through this, is eco-fascism, okay? Eco-fascism. It's an even more extreme and intolerant system under which an authoritarian national or even an international government now owns everything. They own the businesses and they own the industries, and they dictate what they can make, what they can do, what they can sell, how much they can sell it for, and they redistribute the wealth. They employ laws and regulations, intimidation, armies if they have to, and Antifa-style violence to control people's thinking, control their speech, control their movements. Now, you think I'm kidding, but I'm not. Because while you're listening to this program, you should be going to Google and Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and Wikipedia and universities and the mainstream media, because they try to censor, they try to marginalize, they ostracize, they disinvite, they shadow ban, they electronic book burn, and algorithm eradicate differing, alternative, contrarian evidence, analyses, and viewpoints like mine. So you're hearing it now. I'm not sure how long this will be out there for you to listen to, but this is the truth. This is the reality. This we should not be allowing these eco-fascists to do inside of our government. They shouldn't be shaming you into supporting them. And we must keep speaking the truth about this. All right, let's see what we got here. A temperature anomaly map that shows from November 03, from November 3rd to the 10th. That's coming up because today is the 3rd of November. I don't normally give out the date of my programs because these are timeless broadcasts that can be listened to as an archive on tfrlive.com or on youtubelive.com under my channel forever. As long as they will save them on the internet, you can go back and listen to this. So this isn't really November 3rd, 2019, but it is November 3rd, 2019. Anyway, temperatures across the mid-Atlantic and the northeast east are going to significantly drop below trend. And it's setting the scene for a possible snow event late next week. I know we just got done with Halloween, but this is the reality. You see, Earth's atmosphere is actually very thin right now. That is to say, the altitude of the atmosphere has fallen to levels, well, we've never recorded before. Not that we really had the ability to record it before. It takes high altitude balloons to be able to do this, or rockets, and I'll explain that to you in a minute here. Normally, the atmosphere extends to about 300 miles into space. But during solar cycle 24, by the way, this is solar cycle 24, the atmosphere has begun shrinking to levels never seen before. New measurements from a NASA satellite show a dramatic cooling in the upper atmosphere that correlates with the extreme dormant phase of the current solar cycle. For the first time, researchers can show a timely link between the sun and the climate of Earth's thermosphere, okay? The region above 100 kilometers or so. It's an essential step in making accurate predictions of climate change in the high atmosphere, which will eventually affect where we live on the surface. Scientists from Langley Research Center and Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia, presented these results at the fall meeting of the American Geophysical Union in San Francisco late last year. The trend is not reversed in the last 12 months, which means the winters are going to get colder and the summers are going to be hotter. Why? A lot of people ask me that, and I have the answer. The Earth's thermosphere and mesosphere have been the least explored regions of the atmosphere. Well, now they use these rockets that carry what's called SABRE. That's sounding of the atmosphere using broadband emission radiometry instruments. These are launched with small rockets up into the upper atmosphere, and measurements are taken. So the extent of current solar cycle 24's minimum conditions has created a unique situation for these recent SABRE data sets. That's the acronym SABRE. The sun is in a very unusually quiet period. Let's see. That means that infrared energy is able to pass through the atmosphere to the surface easily because the atmosphere is thinner in altitude. And that means that infrared energy is gonna strike the surface and warm it up. It warms the sea, it warms the dark green areas of the planet as well as the people. And I'm sure you notice the difference in the way the sun feels on your skin. Yes? By the way, you could feed your answers to two places. There's a chat room at tfrlive.com. It's free. I mean, it costs nothing to join. And there are right now a bunch of French words in here. No, there are smart people in the chat room, and you can join them. And you can also go to my YouTube channel, Brooks Agnew, and you can join that chat. And there are lots of people in there as well. And even though it's very small, Monica's out there, and Matrix Adjustment is out there, and oh my gosh, so many people, I can't even name them all. And by the way, we're less than 100 hours away from monetization, which means we'll be able to run Top Chat, and you'll be able to put your contributions in the chat room. Be very healthy for this radio program. YouTube puts a very high bar for us to reach that, and we're almost there. So the point I wanted to make is that the sun is able to strike the surface because there's no atmosphere to slow it down, or less atmosphere to slow it down. And also because the Earth is tilted 23 degrees on its axis. When it goes around the sun, the southern hemisphere is beginning to receive more sun now than the northern hemisphere. And so what happens is in the wintertime, because there's less atmosphere, there's less insulation. And that means that the Earth can lose its energy to space much easier. And the truth is that UV wavelengths are also passing through quite easily. UVC, which is the germicidal band, it's disinfecting when it strikes. And it also dimerizes DNA, so it's a good place to get skin cancer in this kind of radiation. It's normally blocked by the upper atmosphere, but now a mere 15 minutes of direct sunlight will deliver you a full day's allowance of radiation, so be mindful of that. So, and this is exactly what we're seeing, okay? Ground that is covered in snow is going to reflect almost all of its energy back out into space. It absorbs almost nothing. So we'll take a quick break. Give us 3 minutes. 3 minutes. We'll be right back after this. These messages. You YouTubers, make sure to hang out. We will be back after the messages. You can keep the chat room going. I'll leave it up there during the break screen. Be right back at the top of the hour.
Truth Frequency Radio is your number one source for news and information without the hate, hype, and fear. We're proud to feature cutting-edge programs like Beyond the Veil with Chris and Cherie Geo, X Squared with Brooks Agnew, Paranormal Portal with Brent Thomas, Karenism Raw with Karen and Missa, Fearless with Frank Castle, Strange World with Mark Sargent, The Eye of Ra with Ra Castaldo, The Infinite Fringe with Billy Ray, Ironworks with Josh Corey, The Kev Baker Show, and dozens more. Did you know you can listen from any telephone by dialing 641-793-7117 or call into your favorite show toll free at 833-TFR-LIVE. Uncensored talk and news you won't hear on the mainstream media. Truth Frequency Radio, your protection from deception.
The impeachment fight. Another horse dies at Santa Anita. I'm Evan Haining. A lawyer for the first whistleblower who reported President Trump's request that Ukraine investigate Joe Biden says his client will answer written questions from Republicans in the House and that his answers will be given under oath. Well, Republicans have criticized House Democrats for not holding public hearings in their impeachment inquiry, although GOP lawmakers have attended the closed-door sessions. On CBS's Face the Nation, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer told host Margaret Brennan those sessions will soon be opened up.
Now we've passed a resolution that says we're going to move to a public hearing where all the transcripts, all the depositions are going to be made known to the president and to the members of Congress.
When do public hearings begin?
I think relatively soon.
No Republicans voted to formalize the inquiry. White House Counselor Kellyanne Conway told Fox News Sunday why they voted no.
The reason you saw every single Republican vote against the impeachment inquiry is because they have not seen evidence of a high crime or misdemeanor, so much so they couldn't even vote to have the inquiry go forward because of the way the inquiry has been so flawed.
In California, all evacuation orders have been lifted as firefighters made progress on the Maria fire in Ventura County that had sent thousands fleeing their homes and farms. Firefighters have contained 50% of the blaze. Tragedy at the $6 million Breeders' Cup at Southern California's famed Santa Anita Park racetrack. Correspondent Jim Roop reports an injured horse had to be euthanized.
Santa Anita has been under a microscope for the previous 36 horses that died either during a race or training since the day after Christmas last. This time, with the nation watching, Mongolian Groom pulled up during the final race. A fractured back leg. The animal had to be put down.
It was the 37th thoroughbred to die at the track since last December. I'm Evan.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
The wicked ones obviously under heavy Masonic influence.
All right, welcome back to X Squared Radio. By the way, shout out to Jen, and let's see, Terry's out there, and Alan's out there, and several other people are out there, West Coast, East Coast, also up there in Canada. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Some people down there in Australia, thank you. And man, it's a late night over there in the UK. Thank you for joining us tonight. You can join this program by accessing our live call-in lines. The phone number to call in is 213-233-3998, 213-233-3998. The call board is open right now. If you want to step away, you want to listen to the phone instead of watching the YouTube, that's fine too. We have a listener line. You don't have to go to iHeart or to iTunes or some of the other listening apps. Sometimes the quality on those can be a little iffy because there are so many people logged on at one time. You can call the number and listen in at 641-793-7117. 641-793-7117. And that's fine. You can, if you call in the caller line and I see your number pop up, I'm going to ask you to come on the program. So that's not a place to park and listen to the program because I might pull you in. As I was saying, we are in Solar Cycle 24, and the consensus is that Solar Cycle 25 is going to be very similar to this one. It is expected that sunspot maximum will occur no later than the year 2023 and no later than 2026, with a minimum peak sunspot number of 95 and a maximum of 130. By the way, in addition, the panel expects the end of Solar Cycle 24 and the start of Solar Cycle 25 to occur probably no earlier than July of this year. We haven't really seen it yet. And no later than September of 2020. So about a year from now, not quite a year, 10 months or so from now, we should see the end of Solar Cycle 24 and enter Solar Cycle 25. Hopefully we see more solar activity in the form of coronal mass ejections and sunspots, because the stream of these high energy particles help build up our atmosphere and rebuild our insulative blanket between us and the cold darkness of space. So let's talk a little bit about sleep. I don't like talking about it very often because I don't get much of it. I don't need much of it. I go a lot of hours. I work between 14 and 15 hours a day, 5 days a week, and then I am on the air an additional beyond that 28 to 30 hours a month. And then I also take care of all my own web work and do writing as well. So I'm not saying you have to live your life like that to be successful, but certainly pouring the amount of time that I do into quality efforts to make things go is why I am where I am. But the deep stages of sleep I do enjoy, just not a lot of it. But this is what may give the brain a chance to wash itself free of potentially toxic substances. It's true. Researchers found that during deep sleep, The slow wave activity of nerve cells appears to make room for cerebral spinal fluid to rhythmically move in and out of the brain, a process believed to rinse out metabolic waste products. You might call it detoxification. You know what it feels like, right? That morning after the, all night binging session on Netflix, or studying for exams, or drinking too much dark liquor. You know what it feels like. The metabolic waste products that build up in the brain. Anyway, those waste products include beta amyloid, a protein that clumps abnormally in the brains of people with dementia. And that's what we want to get rid of. You don't want that stuff to build up. I don't think shaking your head will actually help, or maybe playing will do it. But Lewis, who is the doctor, Laura Lewis, she's an assistant professor of biomedical engineering at Boston University. She reported in the November 1st issue of the magazine Science, which is a really good publication. It's probably good to place near the toilet. I don't mean that way, but I mean, when you sit down, sometimes you want to take some time and you want something very interesting to read Science. It's a great magazine, good for your brain. It proves that deep sleep helps ward off dementia and other diseases. So it's not particularly deep thinking like we have always assumed. Keep your brain exercised like a muscle. Yes, all that's good. But also deep sleep is very important. There's no consensus as to how much you need. It's not the quantity, it's the quality, okay? Researchers have known that cerebral spinal fluid, which is also known as CSF, helps clear metabolic byproducts from the brain so that they do not build up there. They've also known that the process appears to amp up during sleep, but various hows and whys remain a mystery. I think that we can achieve this consciously through meditation. It is accomplishable with practice to get into these deep REM areas, not to where you're passing out and falling off the pillow, but getting the brain into these calm states really does help clear this stuff out. When you're doing a lot of thinking, you're under a lot of stress, you're in a state of scarcity, wondering where your next meal is going to come from, or why you don't have a place to live, or is your car going to make it, or are you going to make your car payment? All this stuff adds stress to the brain, and it can hormonically create these compounds in the brain that are difficult to clear out, and they do build up over time, and they can wear you down, and they can cause a lot of health problems. So clearing these things out on a regular basis, that doesn't mean avoiding your problems. It doesn't mean going around in a state of bliss all the time. It means these deep times of low brain activity to allow this wave action to take place in the convolutions of the brain. There are these fundamental things that your brain is taking care of during deep sleep. Lewis's team found that house cleaning is one of these things. When they studied participants that were in deep sleep, each pulse in slow wave brain activity was followed by oscillations in blood flow and volume, which allowed CSF to flow into these fluid-filled cavities in the central brain. CSF moved in large pulsing waves that were seen only during deep sleep. Based on what's known about the work of CSF, experts said it's reasonable to conclude that slow wave sleep promotes the flushing of this waste from the physical brain itself. Not to mention it's good for your mind. So the role of sleep has been studied for a long time. Some people need 8 to 10 hours of sleep. Some people, like me, can get by just fine on 4 to 5 hours. It is, as I said, the quality of the sleep. How deep do you go? How deep do you dream? I have found in my life that, the more I sleep, the sleepier I get. And I'm the kind of person that if I have to get up at 4:30 in the morning on a routine basis, I wake up about 5 minutes before the alarm, and I'm ready to go. And my kids are the same way. When the alarm rings or we open the door and say, hey, it's time to get ready for school, boom, they're out of bed, they're in their clothes, and they're ready to go. There's no moping around the house in a stupor. They really jump up and they're ready to go. So I don't think anybody does understand why human bodies, being this biological transducer, we shovel all this food into it and energy drinks and proteins and vitamins and whatever. We should be able to go all the time, but we can't. We can't, because we use up more energy than we actually can make with our body. So we store it. We store it in the form of proteins and sugars and fats in our bodies, and we can use those up for bursts of speed or work or endurance or thinking, but eventually the body has to sleep. It is an irrefutable activity that every single human body has to do. Now, it can be trained to go without sleep. Yes, but I will tell you that prolonged sleep deprivation will take its toll on you. It will. It just doesn't matter what kind of shape you're in. It doesn't matter what you eat. It doesn't matter, about a lot of things. You have to at least take naps during the day in order to keep yourself safe. Otherwise, you could pass out while you're driving and smash into something, and you don't want to do that. All right, let's move on. There's other things happening in our government because of this civil war that's going on. Right now, it's a cold civil war, but as I told you, by the year 2024, it's all over. It's all over. The war has happened. The violence has happened. We can avoid it because we're in the past of it right now, and I'm telling you about it so we can make new choices. But Energy Secretary Rick Perry is refusing to appear before a closed session of the House of Representatives Committee investigating President Trump for, everything. Everything. It doesn't matter. They're not investigating a crime. They're investigating President Trump. They don't feel. They're making us believe this is their constitutional duty to investigate President Trump. And they've been doing it since before he took the inaugural address and was sworn into office. I shit you not. This is exactly what's going on, okay? If the committee is interested in conducting a serious proceeding, they're welcome to send for the Secretary's consideration an invitation to participate in an open hearing where the department's counsel can be present and the American people can witness. This is what the Secretary's spokeswoman, Shaylin Hines, said. Rick Perry and White House Budget Office Acting Director Russell Vought have been asked to testify next week, and Rick Perry told them to go pound sand. And I don't really think he cares. I don't think that they have any authority. I don't think that they're flexing. They're not going to put Rick Perry in jail, I can tell you that. So this is where it begins. This is where the defiance begins and where it begins to fall apart. All right, let's talk a little bit about consciousness. It's one of my favorite subjects. We talk about this almost every week on this program. I think it's one of the 5 basic forces of the universe, primary, in fact, before the strong and weak molecular forces, gravity and electromagnetism, is consciousness. But let's talk about it a little bit because it's something we need to understand so that we can take control of it. There's a couple of aspects to it. We, of course, have the conscious mind, which I'm exercising right now and communicating with you through this little tiny hole that's called the camera, trying to look at you while you're looking at me. And then there's the subconscious mind, which runs between 25 and 100 times faster than the conscious mind. And the real challenge is to try to connect the two together, not so that you slow down the subconscious, but so that you speed up the conscious mind and you're able to communicate in a much faster, much deeper, much more rich manner with one another, directly to the heart, directly to the mind, so that you can accelerate the message you're trying to get across and its effectiveness. So explaining how something as complex as consciousness can emerge from this, gray lump of jelly-like tissue in the head is arguably the greatest scientific challenge of our time. We've been trying to do it for a long, long time, probably seriously since the 50s. I could tell you as a young child, if you expressed these talented and gifted abilities in the late 50s, you were snatched up by government research programs and sent to various universities for questions and answers and other fun stuff in tiny little booths. And they learned a lot, and I learned a lot, and I don't know if I was really affected by it or not. I think some of the other kids were, but I never really was a little kid, put it that way. I was hanging around college kids from the time I was 6 or 7 years old, and by the time I was 9, I was taking the family TV apart. The brain is this extraordinarily complex organ, which we understand the general location where different things are stored, music and speech and hearing and the ability to move the body and breathe and all that stuff. We know where all those general regions are located. It's thinking, not actually operating or moving around the physical body, that has fascinated us to this point. It consists of about 100 billion cells, which are known as neurons. Each is connected to 10,000 others, and it yields some 10 trillion nerve connections. That's 10 terabytes, way up there, way up there. We've made a great deal of progress in understanding brain activity and how it contributes to human behavior. But what no one has so far managed to explain is how all of this results in us. How does it result in feelings? How does it result in our point of view, our self-awareness, our desire? Oh, that's a big word. I think that's the word that separates us from the angels. Angels have no desires, or if they do, they can't express them. If they do, they fall and become, like us. We have emotions. We have experiences, and we can use those experiences to make new decisions. Some of us learn from those experiences very quickly. Don't do that anymore. Others of us do it over and over again. Like, you remember your first hangover? Oh my gosh, I'm never doing that again. Hello, people do it again and again all the time. I'm just telling you, we don't learn sometimes as well as we should. So, how does the passing around of electrical and chemical signals inside this brain, between the neurons and the brain, result in a feeling? Pain, yes, we understand. We have all these nerve endings, and if we touch them softly, it's not painful. If we hit them really hard, it is painful. We already understand all that. But there's growing suspicion that conventional scientific methods are actually never going to be able to explain these questions. And I think, luckily, there is an alternative approach, and it's probably ultimately going to be able to crack this mystery. So for much of the 20th century, there was a great taboo against querying the mysterious inner world of consciousness. It was not taken to be a fitting topic for serious science. All right, it was paranormal science. Things have changed a lot, though. And there's now a broad agreement that the problem of consciousness is a serious scientific issue. It's being studied on a lot of levels, including metaphysical levels. But many consciousness researchers underestimate the depth of this challenge. It is something that has baffled, philosophers for millennia. Believing that we just need to continue examining the physical structures of the brain to work out how they produce consciousness. Let's put some drugs in there. Let's put some electrostimulus in there. Let's test this guy and that girl and this animal and that rat. Okay, all that aside. Of course, scientists are used to dealing with observable things, repeatable things, reliable things. I'm a statistician. I understand that, of course. Electrons, for example, are too small to be seen, but scientists postulate unobservable entities in order to explain what we do observe, such as lightning or vapor trails in cloud chambers. But the unique case of consciousness, the thing to be explained, cannot be observed. You can't see it. You can't measure it. You can't hold it in your hands. We know that consciousness exists not through experiments, but through our immediate awareness of our feelings and our experiences, love and hatred and likes and dislikes and wonder and reflection and pondering. All of these things are marvelous abilities that consciousness has, and I'm now just referring to the conscious mind, that we don't understand. And how can science ever explain it? When we are dealing with the data of observation, we can do experiments to test whether we observe matches the theory, matches what the theory predicts. But when we're dealing with the unobservable data of consciousness, this methodology breaks down, and it breaks down in a hurry, especially with kids, especially with people who think they're being observed. Because if we think we're being observed, then there's an observation effect and we change. The best scientists are able to do is to correlate unobservable experiences with observable processes. You know, we scan the brain with various instruments. We put isotopes and dyes in them, and we watch the movement of these isotopes and dyes during different applications of stress or elation or challenge. And by this method, we can establish, for example, that the invisible feeling of hunger, for instance, is correlated with visible activity in the brain's hypothalamus. But the accumulation of such correlations does not amount to a theory of consciousness. What we ultimately want is to explain why conscious experiences are correlated with brain activity. Why is it that such activity in the hypothalamus comes along with a feeling of hunger? In fact, we should not be surprised that our standard scientific method struggles to deal with this idea, this concept of consciousness. So, you know, before the father of modern science, let's call him Galileo Galilei, scientists believed that the physical world was filled with qualities such as colors and smells. But Galileo wanted a purely quantitative science of the physical world, and he therefore proposed that these qualities were not really in the physical world, but they were in consciousness, which he stipulated was outside the domain of science. It's not really, but it is with respect to quantitative analysis. And this worldview forms the backdrop of science to this very day. And so long as we work within it, the best we can do is to establish correlations between the quantitative brain processes we can see and the qualitative experiences that we cannot see. We don't really have a way of explaining why they go together. But we do know that the mind is matter, okay? And we're talking about mind, we're talking about something completely different than the brain. We're not talking about the physical mush, you know, inside your skull. We're talking about something way outside of that. May appear in the crown chakra or in the heart chakra or no chakras at all. Some energy system outside the body. Every physicist runs into this same limit. Physical science doesn't really tell us, for instance, what matter is. I mean, you know, we have it, we can manipulate it, we can mine it, we can hone it, we can sand it, we can paint it, we can lathe it, we can do all kinds of stuff with it. We like definitions and conversion factors, but when we get to the edge of the third dimension, and all that matter we see is reduced to a single proton, we all run into the same void of knowledge. Oh, I mean, we've splattered the little beggars apart by the gazillions, but for all our money and all our power, we have not been able to even make one single proton, not even one. And this may seem bizarre, but it turns out that the physics is confined to telling us about the behavior of matter, not really its origin or why it originates in the first place. For example, matter has mass and charge and spin, but these properties are entirely characterized in terms of behavior, which is attraction, repulsion, frequency, and resistance to acceleration we call inertia. Physics tells us nothing about what philosophers like to call the intrinsic nature of matter and how matter is in and of itself. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we get back from the break. I know you find this fascinating. I do. And we'll get more into it. So hang with me. You YouTubers hang out. We'll be right back after about 3 minutes after these messages. Don't go away.
From the dawn of man, we have turned to nature to help attain balance within ourselves. But somewhere, we lost our way. Western culture is once again remembering the healing benefits of CBD, the non-psychoactive component of the hemp plant. That's why more and more people who use CBD report relief from inflammation and chronic pain, balanced blood sugar and cardiovascular system, relief from muscle tensions, tremors, migraines, headaches, anxiety, depression, and the list goes on. The big question is, where do you get it? IALife is a 99% pure CBD oil made with all organic ingredients, and it's available to TFR listeners worldwide. If you use coupon code TFR at checkout, you'll get $5 towards your order. Head on over to ialife.com now. That's AYA-life.com.
Poor water quality is a major health issue, and it's only getting worse. Municipalities can't keep up, standards have dropped, and pollutants are increasing. Where does it all end? It ends by keeping the pollutants outside of your home with HydroCare's advanced systems available at Wave Home Solutions. No less than the best purification materials and processes have been developed by HydroCare to provide you with healthy, clean water for drinking, cooking, and showering. HydroCare far surpasses the competition in removing chlorine, odors, iron, lead, chemicals, limescale, and much more. Don't settle for less when it comes to your water. We'll take care of the toughest water problems for you, whether it's from a city or well source. Satisfaction guaranteed. For more information, call 888-997-WAVE. That's 888-997-WAVE. Or go to bestwater123.com. That's bestwater123.com.
Wave Home Solutions for a healthy, comfortable home.
He was the deputy director of MI6, Britain's most senior diplomat. He was knighted by the Queen and in charge of thousands of highly trained spies. But he was also a member of the Paedophile Information Exchange. He had 45 diaries full of sex fantasies with children. His friend was the private secretary of Margaret Thatcher. He strangled a child and hit another with his car. He raped young boys and organized orgies with children for other politicians.
The Enigma Channel, intelligent television for planet Earth. EnigmaTV.com.
You're listening to the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
No hate, no hype, no fear.
Welcome back to X Squared Radio. We had some good questions in the chat room during the break. David says, can a brain with chemistry that is out of balance, and that's kind of a whole subject in itself. I'll address that in just a second. So to speak, experience thinking or consciousness, and when the brain chemistry is in balance, isn't the brain then a receiver? And then Piper Vogel, one of my favorite followers out there, says, I believe our DNA transfers to recipients' people's organs. Too many similar stories of new feelings and or phobias. And the answer on balance, I've heard a lot of people say that they had troubles in their job or while they were a member of the armed services because of a chemical imbalance. There is no real balance chemically for human activity or brains, but there are limits. And if your electrolytes, especially potassium and other things like that, if they get out of whack, that is to say your potassium gets too low, then you actually have the inability to control things like heart rate and blood pressure and staying conscious. Of course, sugar levels, all of these things can affect how you feel, how you act, what kind of strength you have, what kind of endurance you have, what kind of tolerance for stress you have. Yes, all of that, yes. But consciousness, I don't think is really affected by that. I think consciousness is a force and an intelligence independent of the physical body. We become symbiotic with the physical body during gestation. And during that period, there's kind of a back and forth where the physical body and the spirit itself, let's call it the raw consciousness of the being itself, could be much older, much more capable than the physical body is. But nevertheless, the two come together and they become one. And what happens is, and you observe this in every newborn. I just had a new granddaughter last week, little Remy. She's so cute, you can't imagine. But you could see the consciousness within trying to get used to the physical body. All the nerve endings are different, the muscles are different, the body is a different size, and it hasn't really reached its full capacity. The brain isn't fully grown until the early teens. Yes, all the basic organs are there, but they're all very small, and they don't have a full range of chemical possibility or functionality that they're going to have when hormones start getting introduced into the system and the ability to reproduce falls into play. Talk about chemical imbalance, but that doesn't necessarily change the consciousness on the inside. The consciousness on the inside is doing two things. First, it's trying to get used to the physical transducer, this biological transducer that we're in. How does it see? How does it hear? What's its balance? Are the legs long or short? Do you have the ability to run or, to throw a ball? All of those things. There's the coordination of the physical body itself. And the second is, maybe even more challenging than that, is to fit into the social construct of your particular community. And that is much more difficult, especially for beings that come from other worlds. The consciousness comes from other worlds to this world, and you don't have a memory as a human being. You have a memory as some other kind of being, 7 feet tall, gold skin, blue eyes, different capabilities, different atmosphere, different plants, different stresses, different social structures. And now you're here, and it's uncoordinating. You have to adapt to it. And some people do it very easily, and most people don't these days, because there are so many souls alive on the earth right now that the new ones have to come from other places to here. And so we have this uncoordination, this, unsynchronized society because of the stresses, and also the length of time that we live has changed. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, people didn't live under even the best conditions to much more than 50. It was very rare to see somebody 70 or 80 years old. They had to have the best of health care, the best of meals. You don't eat rancid meat, and you didn't eat contaminated water, and you took care of your body waste properly. All these things had an effect. Look at the nourishment of societies. Years ago, many societies did not grow beyond a certain height because they didn't have the nutrition. They didn't have the variety of minerals and vitamins that you need in an early age to grow the bones and muscles to be able to reach the full genetic potential. It's not uncommon at all. When I go to China now, I see most of societies pretty much the same height we are. 5'10", 5'11", 6 foot, 6'2". You see that all the time. 25, 30 years ago when I went to China, people were small. Same thing in Japan. In Japan now, people are the same height and size that we are because their nutrition is changing, not their genetics. Their nutrition is changing. So the other question comes from Piper, and it talks about the transfer of DNA from one person to another, and that takes place all the time. We exchange bodily fluids with one another in the form of semen, in the form of other extrusions, in the form of saliva. Hopefully you're not bleeding on one another, but yes, we do exchange DNA all the time. The question is, what does the body do with it? If the body sees it as a foreign invader, it's going to amass its defense system, and it's going to be summarily dispatched. If it reaches the stomach, chances are the stomach acid and the activities in the gut are probably going to take care of it, and it's not going to survive. If it comes in some other way, through some mucous membrane or through the eyes or someplace like that, it's quite possible that DNA could be stored. In fact, we already know from scientific studies that every single man with whom a woman has had sex, and whether it's vaginal or otherwise, they store the DNA from that activity somewhere in the brain. That's just a fact. Many autopsies have confirmed it. Every single man. Now, what does the female body do with that DNA? We don't know. It could explain things like immaculate conception later on. I don't know. Yes. The answer is yes. The question was about oral, and yes, it's stored anyway. So, yes, and blood transfusions as well. There's genetic material in the blood transfusions, and that can also have an effect. Lots of good stuff in the chat room. Let me continue, because there's a little bit more to this. I want to talk about the result of this study. It turns out there's a huge hole in our scientific 3D world with respect to studying matter. Physics leaves us completely in the dark about what matter really is. The proposal of Russell and Eddington was to fill that hole with consciousness. If you have seen my live lecture on Remembering the Future, then you'll see a film in that presentation and a lot of my animations, 3D animations, which will try to explain this to you a little bit better. If you haven't seen the live presentation, you can certainly do so. Just go to my website, brooksagnew.com. It's all my name, just brooksagnew.com, and go to the life mentoring or success mentoring link. In there, you will see the live presentation that I give. It's that event is 5.5 hours long, not the presentation itself, but the entire day. And if you go to the bottom of that page, you'll see 3 cities in there. You'll see Seattle and Charlotte and Phoenix, Arizona, coming up in January and February. If your city isn't on there, there's a form on my contact page. You can suggest a city, and I will come to you. So you don't have to fly. You don't have to get a hotel. You don't have to spend $1,000. Anywhere between $47 and $67. That's about the price of a movie and popcorn for 2. You could have this 5.5 hour experience, and you're going to learn all this stuff that I'm talking about right now. So the result is a type of, let's call it panpsychism. Okay, this is a good word. It's an ancient view that consciousness is a fundamental and ubiquitous feature of the physical world. I know we've tried to tune all that out. We said, oh, there's 4 forces in the universe. That's it. You got the strong and weak molecular forces, and you got electromagnetism and gravity, and that's it. And you know, some of it is for the very small quantum world, and some of it is for the macro world, and we've been searching for a theory of everything to try to tie all that together, and we think we've got it with the E8 lattice and the Gaussian polytope. You learn about that also in the lecture. Don't worry about that. But there's a 5th force missing, and that's consciousness. And now physicists, theoretical physicists like myself, are coming around to that concept, and we're incorporating it into our theories. This new wave of panpsychism lacks the mystical connotations of the previous forms of the view. There's only matter, nothing spiritual, nothing supernatural, but matter can be described from 2 perspectives. Physical science describes matter from the outside in terms of its behavior, but matter from the inside is constituted in forms of consciousness. This means that really mind, not the brain, but the mind, the actual force of human observation, is matter. And that even elementary particles exhibit incredibly basic forms of consciousness. Electrons and protons, and yes, the resulting neutrons, which is the combination of those 2, do exhibit forms of consciousness. Before you write that off, and I know many of you automatically agree with it because you're listeners of this program, but some of you are going, oh, come on now. Consider this. Consciousness can vary in complexity, okay? And some people are just not conscious that they're conscious. We have good reason to think that the conscious experiences of a horse are much less complex than those of a human being, and that the conscious experiences of a rabbit are less sophisticated than those of a horse. As organisms become more simple, there may be a point where consciousness suddenly just switches off, or it becomes a group think. It becomes an instinct, like when you see a flock of birds in the air and they're just moving as one. Obviously, each individual bird, yes, has consciousness, but they're moving as one in the air. So they have this group consciousness. There's no predator. It's just something that they do. They move like a symphony through the air as one. Fish in the sea. If we could slow that camera down, is there one fish that's moving before all the other fishes move and all the fish are watching that fish? No, that's not what happens. All the fish move at once. It's called a school mentality. I talk about it in the book Remembering the Future. Believe it or not, there are people that do this as well. Not a good thing, but very believable, let me tell you. So it's possible that this consciousness just fades a little bit. It becomes indistinguishable as individuals, but it never really disappears. Even an electron has a tiny element of consciousness, and you can't tell me otherwise. So what panpsychism offers us is a simple, elegant way of integrating consciousness into our scientific worldview. Now, we don't really, you might talk about, hey, I feel like this is really going to happen, but you can't tell me that, this solution of sodium methylate has a consciousness. It doesn't have a feeling. It's not going to choose to not catalyze the reaction today. No, it's going to work. There's some variation, obviously, even if all the proportions are exact, but it's not consciously going to decide not to react today. So while our current scientific approach offers no theory at all, only these correlations, the traditional alternative of claiming that consciousness is in the soul leads to a strange picture of nature in which mind and body are distinct. But panpsychism avoids both of these extremes. And this is why some of our leading neuroscientists are now embracing it as the best framework for building a science of consciousness. Will we ever do it? Will we ever have reliability and repeatability with respect to consciousness? Unknown. But it's always interesting to dream about. I'm optimistic that one day we will have a science of consciousness, but it won't be science as we know it today. Nothing less than a revolution is called for, and by the way, it's already on its way. All right. We, from time to time, we talk about great job opportunities here on this program, and this is, I love speaking about this. I really do. And hang on one second. I got to change out this chat room right here because for some reason my chat URL gave up the ghost. And that's just unacceptable because I like you people to be able to see what others are saying. It's just interesting to keep all this in perspective. So we have this. All right, there we go. Let me move this up and over just a little bit. So wonders of OBS. So I'm going to put this up here because it has this ad on here for my upcoming lectures. I want you to pay attention to this while we go through this. So there's a company called Off-World. Yeah, I know. What a cool name for a company. Don't you think the polos would look really good? Like mine says X Squared Radio. I think that looks pretty cool. You could have one of these t-shirts if you come to, or one of these polos if you come to one of my lectures. And it's the only place that you can get them. But of having a polo that says Off-World, wow, what a conversation piece, huh? Wouldn't that, hey, what does Off-World mean? That would be a great conversation starter. Anyway, they're a space drone company. Future lunar explorers could have smart robots ready to help them thanks to a company named Off-World. It's a company that plans a fleet of industrial machines for destinations all over the solar system, not just the moon. The California-based company already has some undisclosed Fortune 500 companies paying it to deploy robots on Earth, like deep in the sea or deep in mines. And while the tech is at all early stage, Off-World said it plans to go a lot further. While it's still too early to tell when the robots would leave the planet, Off-World CEO, his name is Jim Caravala, told Space.com at the International Aeronautical Congress that he would be pleased if the future robotic generations could assist NASA's astronauts as they land on the surface of the moon. That's, by the way, scheduled for 2024. Hey, we already talked about 2024 tonight, didn't we? Interesting, going in two different directions at one time. Does you think that is going to be possible if we have a civil unrest? I don't think so. That's why I think we can avoid it. He says, we're building up our skills by deploying these robots in mines and construction sites, tunnels, and other infrastructure scenarios. And as we build that learning, it will give us an unprecedented level of insight as to how the hardware operates in different environments. Now, you know that some of these robots are going to have to be autonomous. That means not remote controlled. If you put a robot on the bottom of the sea, for instance, to say mine manganate or to mine iron off the bottom of the sea, someplace where it really isn't going to have an effect on the ecosystem of the surface of our world, you can't sit here with a joystick and operate that robot. It's not like driving, a remote controlled dump truck around the living room, because radio waves don't go through seawater. You have to put it on the bottom and leave it alone, let it run its program. And then you got to go pick it up, or it has to be able to prepare the payload to float it to the surface, where the surface ship can pick it up. And if something goes wrong with the drone, well, then you got to go get it. You bring it to the surface and find out what went wrong. It's autonomous. It works without supervision, unless you have a cable going all the way to the bottom. And in shallow waters, that's easy. But in deep waters, that's a real pain in the butt. You have a lot of strong currents. You have a lot of things that happen to long cables. And besides, you got to haul that long cable out there. What are you going to do in 3,000 meter seas? You're going to take out 3,000 meters of control cable with a steel cable capable of lifting that robot back to the surface? Yeah, maybe, but how big would that boat have to be? How much would that cost? And what if something gets fouled in that cable? What if the cable breaks and falls to the bottom of the sea? You lose your robot? You see, a lot of things to think about. Things have to move slowly and methodically and expensively. So the master plan of this company, Offworld, involves using smart robots, which can learn from experience or engage in machine learning in computer engineer parlance. The robots would do the heavy work to get the settlements ready for the humans. The first thing Offworld plans to do on the moon is extract water ice for applications ranging from producing drinking water for humans to making rocket fuel. You can also make oxygen and collect helium-3 and lots of things on the moon. The first order of business, of course, in my mind, is to seal up that volcanic vent and begin to generate oxygen inside that cavity and make a living space. Anyway, the thing is, these robots operate in swarms. They collaborate together. They share the work. They make decisions on their own. And this allows them to adapt to the environment. In a terrestrial mining area, for example, they can sense where the minerals are or where the ore exists, and they can act accordingly. They're powered by solar electricity. These robots would be able to learn on the fly with little human intervention. They would also include modular construction so that similar parts could be used for different kinds of robots, like drive systems and robotic hands and sensors and power batteries, and all that stuff would be interchangeable. They would, whether they're in space or whether they're on the ground, all this could take place pretty easily. You just have to have enough spare parts. Eventually, these robots could even self-replicate by building other robots using these modules like Lincoln Logs or Tinker Toys or Legos, and put themselves together to do different functions. Right now, the Offworld team has 26 people, but it's growing fast. Now, I went looking for the website. There ain't no website. I did a search in Google. You can't find these people, but they're in California. So if they're a California corporation or an LLC, you should be able to go to the Secretary of State of California, and should be able to find an address for these people and go apply for a job. I mean, come on. This is a really cool company. To be neat things to do with this company. So go look them up. They're diversifying their presence throughout the solar system and beyond. They think it's a viable risk. It's a mitigation strategy to ensure the long-term survival of life and the human civilization. Interesting and exciting, and there's investing in a life insurance policy that does not free us. Investing in life insurance doesn't free us from the responsibility of doing everything we can to mitigate against existential risks on Earth. So we should be doing it on other planets, just to make sure we don't keep all of our eggs in one terrestrial basket, so to speak. Let's see. Oh, yeah. We see a new generation of industrial robots as the key enabler of human expansion beyond our home planet. I couldn't agree more. I don't think the first move out there should be humans on the ground. What are you going to do? You're going to collect some rocks. You're going to look around. You're going to take some pictures. You're going to go, yeah, it's really cold up here in the dark, let me tell you. It's risky. It's risky. Solar radiation passing through the Van Allen radiation belts, all these kinds of things affect human life, but they don't affect robots. So we should start from scratch on the moon or Mars, and we should do it with these robots. It won't offend anybody and will create tons of jobs. You don't have to worry about displacing anybody on the moon with a robot. It's an extraordinary way to reduce the risks and get things going. So take a look at the YouTube feed there, you YouTubers, and you can see this icon. It says Remembering the Future. That is the icon for this lecture. Go to brooksagnew.com and then click on the upcoming events link at that website. There are events in Seattle, in Charlotte, North Carolina, and also in Phoenix, and we're going to be adding more cities. Now, these are smaller events in the sense that there's not going to be 6 speakers. You don't have to get a hotel or a plane. You don't have to fly or drive unless you want to come hours and hours to see me. But you get, instead of 90 minutes and a lecture and a conversation at a table, you get 5.5 hours of pure energy. Go there, check it out, sign up. The tickets are at Eventbrite. It's super easy to get in, and it's, I promise, a great, great value. You get 2 books signed, you get the lecture, you get workshop, you get training, face-to-face time, ask me anything, and it will be wonderful. So check it out. We'll see you right after the break. Don't go away. More X Squared Radio.
Truth Frequency Radio is your #1 source for news and information without the hate, hype, and fear. We're proud to feature cutting-edge programs like The Christopher Everard Show, The Covert Report with Susan Lindauer, Enemy Within Radio with Tom Barnes, Freaky Friday with The Woo Crew, The Gematria Effect with Zachary Hubbard, America's Evil Genius with Travis Cook, Phoenix Rising Radio with Phoenix, Quantum Connections with Lucky, and dozens more. Did you know you can listen from any telephone by dialing 641-793-7117 or call into your favorite show toll free at 833-TFR-LIVE. Uncensored talk and news you won't hear in the mainstream media. Truth Frequency Radio, your protection from deception.
Whistleblower offer, new ISIS leader. I'm Evan Haining. President Trump wants to know the name of the whistleblower who revealed Trump's request that Ukraine investigate Joe Biden. Correspondent Jeremy Diamond reports while still remaining anonymous, the whistleblower is making a new offer to GOP lawmakers.
The whistleblower had previously offered to answer questions under oath and in writing from the House Intelligence Committee as a whole, but now under fire from Republicans who have been complaining about the process of this impeachment inquiry. This whistleblower is offering to answer questions in writing directly to House Republicans on that committee.
Somalia's Islamic State affiliate, one of ISIS' most important outposts, has sworn allegiance to a new leader named Karashi. And correspondent Sam Hill reports ISIS says it's behind 3 recent attacks that killed at least 56 people.
The so-called Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the murder of Malian soldiers on Friday and then the subsequent killing the following day of a French soldier in that same country. This should be seen really as part of their attempt to claim responsibility, whether or not they actually participated in any of these terrorist acts, because their leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, is dead, and the territory that they once controlled that made them so magnetic is no longer under their control.
Over 50,000 runners competed in the New York City Marathon. Correspondent Steve Kastenbaum reports on the winners.
Jeffrey Kamworwor of Kenya won the race for a second time with a time of 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 13 seconds. Jocelyn Jepkosgei of Kenya got her first win in 2 hours, 22 minutes, and 38 seconds.
Well, you can see how good that is. Most of the 52,000 runners finished the race in between 3.5 and 5 hours. Today's event was the 49th NYC Marathon, and the weather was great. I'm Evan Haining.
You must unite what has been set aside.
We are TFR, Truth Frequency Radio.
Hey, so glad you all could be there out there, especially on YouTube. Thanks so much. Let me make sure the ads, everything are right. Yes, that's correct. January 11th in Seattle, January 18th in Charlotte, and also February 8th in Phoenix are the three cities where the success mentoring events are going to take place. I could call them all kinds of things. There's a lot of science in this thing, a lot. It's not all woo-woo, believe me. There are scientific aspects to the law of attraction that need to be considered. 99.9% of the presenters out there, they don't know this stuff, and they try to give you the feel-good part of it, which feels great. But you need to have the tools. You need to have the math. You need to understand why it works, how it works, why it's reliable, repeatable, and how you can make the bounty of the universe basically yours for the taking, and to be happy with what you're doing. So I'm calling this the second chance life coaching, because the first 50 years of your life you did what you had to do. So the second 50 years you should do what you dream. Let me help you see how to do that. So sign up today and you could be part of it. All right, let's get back to the subject that we began with tonight, because all of this is developing around us. And although you have a lot of choices that you could take and watch for your podcasting pleasure, especially on YouTube, my gosh, there are a lot of people that have come on in the last year or two, heck, the last month or two, that are quite talented, very good entertainers. Maybe I'm not as good an entertainer, maybe I'm not as good looking, but I've been doing this for 15 years. And I promise you that we have insights and aspects of this program that you don't get anywhere else. In fact, this is the beginning of the news week every week, Sunday nights. This is where you should be if you're running out of steam from Friday's news, and all you're getting is the recycled stuff repeated over and over again over the weekend. If you want to know what's going to happen tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock Eastern Time, Breitbart Radio is going to begin with Alex Marlowe, and he is going to cover a lot of the things that I'm covering tonight. So you might as well have a jump on it so you can call in tomorrow and give him the truth about what's going on. The war in the Republic has taken 86 years to get to this point. But finally, the Justice Department is taking its aim, and it's training its guns on what heretofore was unthinkable, unless you are a career civil libertarian. In 1935, Roosevelt formed the first Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was tasked to defend the interests of the nation. not to defend the Constitution, like most people think. And that really has no meaning. It didn't have any meaning then. It doesn't have a meaning now, other than to act as the opposition research firm for the Democrat Party. It has never wavered from that charter. In fact, one bureau became many agencies, departments, and administrations. Their tools and their training became the most feared spy force the world has ever seen. It was the true art of war in perfection. For years, the civil libertarians have been warning us that this special and untouchable intelligence community posed a threat to democracy as we know it in these United States. Every so often, they would point to some excess of the FBI or the CIA and tell us that the lights were going out in democratic America. Does not the Washington Post run atop its front page the maud line, "Democracy dies in darkness"? Yes, it does. It's right up there at the top. Well, the darkness descended upon Donald Trump the moment he decided to run for president, well before he became a candidate, because they feared him. President Obama directed his FBI and the CIA, in cahoots with Mrs. Hillary Clinton, to craft and codify the infamous dossier she financed. It threw a bloody blanket of darkness over his campaign. A swift succession of assassinations occurred as the Obama administration was ending to cover their tracks, which, by the way, included nearly a dozen Russian diplomats around the world and a promising young campaign worker named Seth Rich. Late last week, the counterintelligence effort led by the Trump administration to find and prosecute these deep state actors took an angry turn. We learned that what had been a Justice Department administrative review had suddenly become much more serious, didn't we? It has become a criminal inquiry. That means the Justice Department believes there is sufficient evidence that a crime has been committed. Wow, that's just the way the Justice Department is supposed to work. Now, the prosecutor in charge, John H. Durham, will have the power to subpoena witnesses' testimony and documents. He will convene a grand jury and file criminal charges. Mr. Durham and Attorney General William Barr have been looking into the origins of the Obama administration spying on President and candidate Trump. Just how did it begin? And who exactly started it? The trail has led them on a blood trail that has gone to Washington, Italy, Australia, Belgium, the Ukraine, and deep within the guts of the Pentagon itself. They are clearly unsettled by the answers they have found so far. Murder, subterfuge, spying, fraud, counterfeiting, money laundering, bribery, and rape shock their senses every step they take. Now, I've been studying the Obama administration's spying on Trump for over 7 years. Oh, yeah, it went on a long time. I wrote a #2 bestseller about it that has been in the top 100 books for the last 2 years, called Charm of Favor. While most of the mainstream media searched desperately for a smoking gun carried by one of President Trump's people or even by the president himself, I looked elsewhere. I looked at the politicized atmosphere within the FBI and the CIA. I even looked at British intelligence. I found billions in drug cartel cash, laundered through banks controlled by the Obama administration. Recently, Pelosi and Schiff, and by the way, you're not going to hear this anywhere before right here, right now. Pelosi and Schiff traveled to Jordan in an attempt to secure the flow of cash from their Syrian operation, since Trump moved the American troops out of the way of Turkey's border arrangements. The Turks threatened to stop the flow of money from Syria's lucrative drug trade to the Democrat political machine, while in Jordan making a public show of meeting with King Hussein to criticize the president's diplomacy. They also met with a courier, and they gave him instructions to deliver. That courier was followed by U.S. Special Forces, and he led them to a most valued target, Abu al-Baghdadi. Within hours of Pelosi's return to the U.S., Baghdadi was located and killed. And the following morning, President Trump announced the success of the operation and the fact that Pelosi and Schiff had been kept out of the loop. I know why. Because they were involved in the betrayal of al-Baghdadi and they didn't even know it. That was not the best part, though. Oh, it caused a panic, but that wasn't the best part. President Trump also mentioned the retrieval of tons of valuable intel from the compound, as they were successful in surprising them and stopping them from destroying it. Bank accounts, phone numbers, email addresses, and records of billions in drug commissions and payouts were recovered. Hours later, Pelosi and Schiff panicked. They sleeplessly obligated every single Democrat to vote for an impeachment inquiry, even though it meant certain political suicide for more than 40 Democrats who were elected in districts that voted for President Trump by wide margins. The former head of the CIA, John Brennan, the former head of National Intelligence, James Clapper, and the former head of the FBI, James B. Comey, are heavily involved in this entire operation. The murders, the spying, and the money laundering on scales never seen before in world history were all conducted under these men and their soldiers. If you want to know, this is real, factual information. Some of it is firsthand. It's in the book, Charm of Favor. Charm of Favor. Let me go ahead and put the ad back up there so you guys can see it. It's available on Amazon. It's available in Nook and Kindle. And if you buy any of those versions of the book, I will give you the audio version for free. The information's right inside the cover. All you have to do is buy the book. Now, if you remember, President Trump claimed that the Obama administration had bugged or wiretapped Trump Tower. You remember that? I mean, the chattering class raged about how ridiculous this claim was for months. But we now know that Trump was right. Comey had sitting on his desk FISA warrants on Carter Page, Paul Manafort, and Michael Flynn that gave him the power to reach into Trump Tower and intercept the campaign's communications. And the worst attempted coup in U.S. history has now been exposed, thanks to Charm of Favor and the great work done by the Trump Department of Justice. Now, the most perverse irony in all of this is that American officials who blessed, who bleated, who yelled and screamed and table thumped and hit all the Sunday shows talking about the loudest about the malicious actors interfering in the election presided over a government that actually did that exact thing. It was members of the U.S. government who spied upon Trump's campaign and sought to sabotage it through entrapment schemes and criminal leaks. Actors that you don't think of very often, like Samantha Power, the ambassador to the UN, unmasked American names over 220 times personally. She was owned by John Brennan, owned by him. She publicly said it's not a smart thing to piss off John Brennan. She should know. It was Brennan who turned to foreigners to craft the narrative and actually do the spying. He knew he could not get authorized inside the United States. Well, it looks like they have failed, but not for lack of trying. Not for lack of trying. In the next few days, we're going to learn much more about this attempted coup. I can't give you any details right now because I would only be speculating. But this is going to come through the report of Inspector General Michael Horowitz detailing the FISA abuses. It's not a small report. This report is about this thick. It's about 2 big telephone directories thick. Even though Durham's findings, which will result in a raft of indictments, this is going to be shocking. Brace for impact, Americans. The Civil War that was cold is about to go hot. The question is already floating out there. You've seen it. If you haven't, you're behind the times because it's moving. What is the question? The question is it wet yet? Is it wet yet? It means wet works. It means, have the knives been drawn? Is the blood being let? Is it wet yet? Means, is the Cold War going hot? I tell you now, there is enough evidence to have a trial. The persons of interest have already or are being served as we speak tonight. While this program is going on right now, they are being served. Tomorrow morning, you're going to hear about it. Many of these people will be dying or attempting to plead for immunity using their lawyers. But right now, it may be a very good time to be a lawyer in Washington, D.C. Do I hope that this war is fought only in the courts? You bet I do. More than you know. But I can also tell you that this is the most dangerous time in America's history. The global syndicate does not like losing. And they never, and I mean never, will surrender. They don't care who has to die. In fact, the more people that die in this war, the better. I think it's only your prayers that are keeping this war between various assassins and has not spilled out into the streets yet. I can tell you that even if you defend yourself against their thugs in the streets, you stand a very good chance of being sent to prison yourself. So you be careful and you watch your eyes. There's a lot going on out there, and things that we dreaded. Excuse me while I take a sip of my wonderful ice-cold grapefruit juice. There is a dread that we've had for a long time. We've read about it in books from A Brave New World, 1984, other books. Some are novels and some are more predictions than anything else. Atlas Shrugged, The Birth Trilogy, the list goes on and on. If you read Charm of Favor, you see prophetic descriptions of an advanced profiling program that will be developed to identify potential threats to public safety. The Voice, I call it The Voice in Charm of Favor. It describes a plan to make Americans shame anyone who would own a gun based upon frequent, horrific mass shootings. In fact, as I was writing one of the chapters about how the Voice was going to craft mass shootings and how they were going to blame the gun, and they were going to actually make it socially so unacceptable to own a gun that they would be successful in beginning to gather them up or force people into not selling them anymore, not buying them anymore. As I was writing that chapter, the Las Vegas shooting occurred. And shortly thereafter, Dick's Sporting Goods stopped selling guns. I'm telling you, it was very prophetic to me. It says this is the way this has been done on many worlds. The people will actually expose anyone who owns a gun as a potential mass shooter. Well, last Wednesday, Attorney General William Barr issued a memorandum to all the U.S. attorneys, law enforcement agencies, and top-ranking Justice Department officials. And here's what he announced. Listen closely. The imminent implementation of a new National Disruption and Early Engagement Program. Let me read that to you again. National Disruption and Early Engagement Program. It's aimed at detecting potential mass shooters before they commit any crime. Per the memorandum, Barr has directed the Department of Justice and the FBI to lead an effort to refine our ability to identify, assess, and engage potential mass shooters before they strike. The Attorney General further describes the coming initiative, slated to be implemented early next year, as, and I quote, an efficient, effective, and programmatic strategy to disrupt individuals who are mobilizing toward violence by all lawful means. And I want you to understand one important thing, Earth Explorers. These individuals don't have to actually have committed any sort of crime yet. He also described that those who receive the memorandum send their best and brightest to a training conference at FBI headquarters this coming December, where the DOJ, FBI, and private sector partners will prepare for the full implementation of the new policy and will also be able to provide new ideas for inclusion in the program. I really, really want the Project Veritas guys to send a student to this class. Perhaps the most jarring aspect of the memorandum is this: his frank admission that many of the early engagement tactics that the new program would utilize were born of the posture we adopted with respect to terrorist threats. In other words, think now as we connect these dots. The foundation for many of the policies utilized following the post 9/11 war on terror, can you say Patriot Act? Can you say the National Defense Authorization Act? Can you say indefinite incarceration without a charge? Yes. All of these things are the foundation for the early engagement tactics that Barr seeks to use to identify potential criminals as part of this new policy. Through those war on terror policies, or though those war on terror policies have largely targeted individuals abroad, that's okay. They don't have constitutional protections over there, but we do. We do. You cannot use these tactics domestically. Okay? Though more specifics of the new policy will be provided in the forthcoming notice, Barr notes that newly developed tactics used by the Joint Terrorist Task Forces include the use of clinical psychologists, threat assessment professionals, intervention teams, and this is the scary one, really scary, community groups. Community groups to detect and suggest this new early engagement program will work along similar lines. That means that if you're in the grocery store and you're carrying a concealed weapon under your clothes and you lean over to check out those cantaloupes and somebody back there in the bread section looks and sees that you're carrying a weapon, they could pick up their phone, they could dial 911, a community group, and they could report you having a weapon in the store, and they fear for their life. Do they really? No, but they're an activist. They're part of this, and I'm just highlighting this here on my page, community groups. And lo and behold, a new intervention team is going to come through the front door of that grocery store, go straight to the produce section, and you are going to be thrown over the onions and apples. Why do you have a weapon in this store? And then the background checks start all over again for you. Oh, yeah. You see, the goal of the program is ostensibly to circumvent these issues by finding new and likely controversial ways to determine intent. Why did you have that gun in the grocery store? Were those cantaloupes threatening you? Are you afraid to go into the frozen food section? Why do you have a gun out in public? And of course the proper answer is because I can. Barr also suggested the likely course of action that would follow the identification of a given individual as a potential mass shooter. The Attorney General notes that in past cases, individuals deemed a violent or terroristic threat before they commit a crime are subjected to detention. They're subjected to court-ordered mental health treatment, substance abuse counseling, electronic monitoring, can you say ankle bracelet, among other measures. The new program would then apply these same practices to individuals in the U.S., not abroad, in the U.S. We'll take a break. We'll be right back after this. Don't go away.
The reviews for Extendivite are amazing. Here are some from Amazon. By Christine, great for heart palpitations. By Ann, before I started using this product, every afternoon my ankles and my hands would be swollen. That doesn't happen anymore. So if that part of their advertising is true, I have to assume that the rest of it is also. Not to mention that when I had my yearly blood test, only a few weeks after beginning to use this product, my cholesterol had dropped over 30 points. I'm going to continue to take it. By Croc, I love this product. It really works. By Brad, works great, thank you. Tell us your story. Get your Extendivite today. To order, call 1-877-928-8822. That's 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
Do you want to lose weight but have no idea where to begin? The Fast Start Diet, a 3-day weight loss plan, is the answer. 3 days of nutritionally balanced, calorie-restricted meals delivered right to your door. No shopping, no measuring, and no cooking. Everything is prepared for you and ready to eat at home or on the go. The Fast Start Diet has all the amazing benefits of intermittent fasting without starving. We've helped thousands of people who have struggled to reach their weight loss goals. Isn't it time we helped you? With the Fast Start Diet, you'll lose weight and feel great.
Find us on Amazon or go to faststartdiet.com and use promo code POWER to get $10 off your first box. As a special bonus, we will include our #1 rated Lipo3 appetite suppressant spray free with your order. Whatever your diet plans are, start with us at faststartdiet.com and use promo code POWER.
Travis Cook, America's Evil Genius, here to invite you to join us every Tuesday afternoon here on Truth Frequency Radio. No, on our show, you will not see a bunch of 3-piece suits or a cocktail party, and you certainly won't see a bunch of inside the Beltway barrier. But you will see eye-gouging, crotch-kicking, no-holds-barred political discussion, the likes of which you won't see anywhere else in media. America's Evil Genius. We come to you every Tuesday from the outskirts of war-torn St. Louis, Missouri, where there's always a good race rider sex scandal just around the corner. Join us every Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, and noon on the left coast right here on TFRLive.com. America's Evil Genius, Travis Cook, on TruthFrequencyRadio.com.
No hate, no hype, no fear. We are TFR, your protection from deception.
I've been waiting for this moment since my first breath in. Never would have thought I'd be afraid to begin, but here I am, the edge of the water, wondering if I can swim. Never seem to notice all the days pass through, but in this final moment, I'm still chasing the truth. I want an explanation why I can't stay here forever in my youth. And if I press on, will you wait? Will you wait for me forever? Or would it be wrong to ask you to come with? Tell me, will you wait?
Yes, I wish I could stay with you forever. I am co-host on a radio program Monday nights with Lucky One on this network, and on Wednesday for 1 hour, and then later on that night, 8 to 10 o'clock, I'll be on another network. Won't talk about that here on this network, but America Free Radio is expanding, and the demand is continuing, and we're making a transition. I just want to let you know, in recent decades, and especially after the September 9/11 attacks, many of you remember where you were. I do myself. Before that day on September 10th, we cherished every single one of our God-given rights in this country: our freedom of speech, our freedom of movement, right to bear arms, our ability to protect ourselves from illegal search and seizure. We would never, ever on September 10th have agreed to have ourselves strip searched before boarding an airplane. But after that, we quietly traded an increasing number of civil liberties for what we thought was increased government counter-terrorism programs and wars purportedly waged to keep us safe. We now know all that was wrong, but we have not changed course. Those same policies used to target terrorists are now set to be used against you. And your electronic lives and communications are now set to be scoured for evidence of whatsoever those in power at the time want to consider mental illness. Once the Bureau's untransparent algorithms flag you, that's going to be enough to lead to a court-ordered mental health treatment event or even imprisonment, regardless of whether or not a crime was actually committed or even planned in the first place. Certainly, that person is going to have all his weapons confiscated immediately. They'll be placed on a no-fly list, or maybe even worse. As a consequence, Attorney General William Barr's coming pre-crime program is arguably worse than the stuff of dystopian science fiction novels, because our capabilities are far better than those writers could have imagined. And films don't see it either. The deep state, you remember the Enemy of the State with Will Smith? Remember that? Not even close. But it was amazing, going back and watching that with Gene Hackman and listen to the lines that Gene Hackman said in that movie. It was a very prophetic movie. Those abilities didn't really exist then. This is pre-World Trade Center, pre-9/11. And yet, here we are. We're there. That writer was dead on the money. Americans who have committed no crime will be expressly targeted individuals based on their use of electronic consumer products and the contents of their communications with their friends, family, co-workers, and others. It's a scary time. And I'm sorry, Piper, I did not see your earlier chat. The chat's been moving too fast in YouTube. So I didn't see your earlier chat, but I'm glad that you're putting it in there. Monica and Diane and Agatha and Terry, and there's a whole bunch of people in there. 7th 7, that's pretty good. Welcome all of you, and please share and make sure you turn your notifications on so you know I'm here next time, and tell your friends about America Free Radio here on YouTube Live. We'll also be doing Facebook Live and other venues to try to spread the wealth around so that other people can learn it just as well. All right. Yeah. She says, thanks for trying to help. All right. You're welcome. I'll do more. I want to talk about volcanoes. Not that they particularly fascinate me, but we're seeing a lot of weird stuff in California right now. And I don't think it's all Gavin Newsom. Although I think a significant amount of it is a crazy governor you have out there right now. But we're seeing a lot of fires pop up in weird places, and I've seen a couple of videos out there of like storm sewers on fire under the streets, and I'm going, how does a fire get down there? Well, also there are a lot of earthquakes in diverse places, if you know what I mean. And as if wildfires and earthquakes weren't enough to lose sleep over, people in California, Oregon, and Washington can start worrying about volcanoes too. I know, right? Like Mount St. Helens was a while back, but no. This is reawakened stuff. A new assessment carried out by the United States Geological Survey, we call them the USGS, rated 18 U.S. volcanoes as posing a, quote, very high threat level. Of those, 3 of them are in California. 5 are in Alaska, 4 in both Washington and Oregon, and 2 in Hawaii. We've seen enough Hawaii activation to know what's going on there, right? Not surprisingly, Hawaii's Kilauea volcano is currently considered by the USGS as the most dangerous volcano on U.S. soil, but for years now, California's been bracing for the big one. I was born and raised there, left there when I was 17. I've been through some hellacious earthquakes there. I mean, the movie Earthquake was made about, that earthquake, I was in that earthquake, and it was bad. It was really bad. The magnitude 6.7 or greater earthquake that is expected to send ripples through the state within probably next decade anyway. But there's another deadly threat that is almost as likely, and I know you didn't know this, and I think nobody's really prepared for it. With the earthquake, it shudders a little while and it's over. And if you live in a modern household, you probably don't have anything to worry about anyway. Maybe a little gas or water disruption or power disruption, but pretty soon things are going to be back to normal. If you live in a skyscraper, a high rise, probably no problems at all. All those buildings are designed to take that. If you're in an older building made of block or whatever, brick, you could have a problem. But for the next 30 years, there's a 16% possibility of a small to moderate sized volcanic eruption occurring somewhere in California. This prediction is based on 5,000 years of volcanic activity records. About 200,000 people live and work in a region at risk of an eruption, and millions visit every year, according to the report. In comparison, there's a 22% possibility that an earthquake at the San Andreas Fault, sometimes known as the Big One, will hit within that time frame. That's not really that much, 16%, 22%. Gosh, I'd much rather face an earthquake than you would a volcano, right? That's really a no-brainer. Well, the potential for damaging earthquakes, landslides, floods, tsunamis, and wildfires is widely recognized in California. Wow, what a paradise, huh? The same cannot be said for volcanic eruptions, though, despite the fact that they occur in the state about as frequently as the largest earthquakes on the San Andreas Fault. There are systems in place to detect potential volcanic eruptions. I know you knew that. But understanding the hazards in these specific parts of the state is important to reduce damage and the loss of life. You remember when Mount St. Helens went off? We knew about it. We knew about it days before and certainly hours before, and we evacuated people who would listen to reason. Some didn't, and they set their cameras up too close, and they were ready to watch, and they were killed. They were killed, all of them. It was just, shockwave is so powerful, you can't imagine it. There are 8 volcanic areas throughout the state that experts say are threatening to people or property nearby. And this is going to be surprising to you, especially if you live within eyesight of one of these. Just a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was on Mount Shasta. Yeah, I was on Mount Shasta in California. Mount Shasta, Medicine Lake Volcano, and Lassen Volcanic Center in Northern California, as well as the Salton Buttes near the southern border, Salton Sea is about 250 feet below sea level, have erupted within the last 3,000 years and are considered to be high to very high risk areas. The Long Valley Volcanic Region is in the east, has also erupted in that time, but is considered moderate to very high risk, and the Clear Lake Volcanic Field north of San Francisco is also considered to be high to very high risk. A volcano can cause widespread damage even when it is not erupting, according to the report. An erupting volcano can cause ballistic showers of rocks and acid and smoke and fast-moving currents of ash or lava called pyroclastic flows and acid rain. Sulfuric acid, once this stuff hits rain or hits river water or lake water, it turns to sulfuric acid. But even volcanoes that are not currently erupting can cause hazards, because the grounds around the volcano may be unstable, and they can cause landslides. While these effects are most strongly felt near the site of the eruption, mudslides or floods can reach over 50 miles away. An ash fall can even reach areas 1,000 miles away. When you take a tall mountain like Mount Rainier or Mount Adams or Mount Hood, that has hundreds of thousands of tons of snow on it. If you get a massive heating event on that mountain, that snow suddenly melts. It doesn't melt slowly, it melts suddenly, and it comes rushing down the mountain like a flash flood, and it can wipe out communities. Volcanic hazards are likely to be more than a local problem confined to a single county or region. A future eruption in Northern California, for example, could adversely impact natural resources and infrastructure important to our statewide water, power, and transportation systems. And if it ejects ash into the stratosphere, it can affect the world for weeks, months, and even years after it happens. While volcanic eruptions can't be prevented, they can, in most cases, be predicted. A gaping hole in a dying tectonic plate beneath the ocean along the west coast of the United States may be wreaking havoc at Earth's surface. Many of you know what this is called. It's called the Juan de Fuca plate. Okay? It is huge. Thanks to a new detailed data set, they're the first to say so with certainty. Let me see if I can find out how big this thing is. Oh, here we go. The Juan de Fuca Plate is long, stretching about 600 miles along the Pacific Northwest, from Vancouver Island, Canada, to Cape Mendocino, California. No part of it is above the water. It's a total oceanic plate that's subducting. It's diving underneath another plate. In this case, the Northern American plate, which is a continental plate. From 2011 to 2015, scientists boated out over different parts of the Juan de Fuca Plate. They dropped ocean bottom seismometers under the water and let these sensors collect seismic data from earthquakes all over the world for a year. Now, obviously, these weren't connected to the surface, and they couldn't get information from these seismometers while they were on the bottom. So when the year was up, the researchers returned. They fished up the seismometers, and they uploaded the data, which allowed them to create a tomography, or a layout of the plate. And then they deployed the devices to other spots on the plate. It was an enormous effort, but it gave absolutely priceless data. And the data from these seismometers showed how seismic waves traveled through the plate, which in turn revealed information about the plate's composition and varying temperatures. One region under central Oregon showed a gap in high-velocity seismic waves, and it's been interpreted to be a hole. But why does the hole exist? Well, the researchers, Hawley and Richard Allen, director of the Berkeley Seismological Laboratory, they hypothesized that there's a weak zone in the Juan de Fuca Plate that exists because the plate formed at two overlapping ridge segments. As this weakened zone of the oceanic plate goes under the continental plate, it actually unzips from the bottom up. It creates kind of a gash in it, or a tear. And this tearing may actually cause the plate to fragment. And what is left of the small pieces of the plate will attach to other plates nearby. But it's going to take at least a few million years to die. Now, the interesting thing is that these things are subject to the movement of magma underneath, and they have been measuring what are called magma quakes. These are small quakes, 1 or less on the Richter scale, but they're harmonic in value. That is to say, they occur on a pulsing basis. The story links the hole in the tomography with this known weak zone in a plate, and with a series of these volcanic centers in Oregon. Now, the theory is that if there is an eruption, if there is a sub-oceanic, a marine eruption, that the concussion from that eruption, that explosion, would cause a tsunami between 500 and 1,000 feet high. It would be traveling between 200 and 400 miles an hour, the shock wave. The shock wave would go through the deep water with only a mild swell, but as it got closer and closer to the shallows, the swell would begin to come out of the water, and it would rise up hundreds of feet in the air, and it would go ripping through Portland up the Hood River and pretty much wipe out everything on both sides of the river. And it could even do a broader area along Northern California. So the USGS California Volcano Observatory uses GPS receivers to record ground deformations. How much do they move? An inch, 2 inches, a foot, a meter. These seismometers measure the shaking, and the spectrometers measure the gas emissions from the ground. And an increase in activity on any one of these instruments may be the first sign that a volcano will soon erupt. How much warning do we have? We don't know. Could be a week, could be a day, could be an hour. Although eruptions cannot be stopped, we think that we can detect them in time to move people out of the way. That being said, have you ever been in Seattle traffic? Have you? There's no moving even on a normal workday. Imagine if you tried to move the greater Seattle area out of there south on I-5 and get them to safety somewhere east in Montana or in Wyoming, or it would be a disaster. And what if people ran out of gas on that trip? What if there were traffic accidents? What if there were medical emergencies? You understand that this is not an easy thing to do. So you should have a plan. You should have a plan. If you lived in these areas, you should make sure that your gas tank is never, and I mean never, under 3/4 of a tank full. Don't ever park your vehicle in your driveway with 1/8 of a tank of fuel. You're just asking for trouble. And the other thing I would keep in your vehicle at all times, if you have to put a plastic tub or put it, under the spare tire area or something, I would have 2 to 3 days supplies, water, food. I don't care if it's canned goods like tuna or energy bars, blankets, spare shoes, things like that, because there ain't going to be no FEMA. You're not going to get a warm cookie and a blanket from the government. You're going to take care of yourself, and make sure you have at least 3/4 of a tank of gas, because you're going to have to get 200 to 300 miles away to be safe. All right. Some of these events, they swiftly melt snow and ice, and they can produce torrents of meltwater, and these pick up loose rock, and they become rapidly flowing slurries of mud and boulders known as lahars. In contrast to lava flows and pyroclastic flows that are unlikely to extend further than, well, maybe 1 mile or 2 miles or 10 miles at the most from the volcano summit, these can go a long way, tens of miles, 10, 20, 30 miles. There are events of flash floods that happen in the mountains. The people that are actually killed in the flood never even see the origin of the water. They don't see the dam break. They don't see the thunder shower. They don't see the sudden melt off. It just comes running down the ravine and wipes people out at campsites very suddenly. So this is a big deal. So at Mount Rainier, the risk from lahars is greater than from lava flows. It's also affects a larger area because Rainier is like right there. It's like beautiful, but it's right there. Lahars look and behave like flowing concrete. They're heavy, they're thick, they're fast moving, and they destroy or bury most man-made structures like houses and cars and bridges, and there's no getting away from these things. You can't outrun them. You may, if you have a wide open road, you may be able to outdrive them. But we're talking about a lahar of a wall of this concrete-like slurry moving at speeds of 45 to 50 miles an hour. And it can be as high as 100 feet or more. It's not water. It's thick, mushy muck. And if you're hit by it, I don't care what you're in. I don't care if you're in a bus. You're gone. Okay? They thin out and they spread out in wide valleys downstream, slowing to about 15 to 20 miles an hour. But that's still faster than I can run, probably faster than you can run. Deposits of past lahars, they're all over those valleys, all over. If you go and look around Mount Rainier's flanks, you'll see the remnants of these lahars laying there. It's happened before. I'm including a map in my notes, which you can get easily by going to tfrlive.com/X2 radio. Click on the notes tab, and all these notes are available for you. So I have sometimes 50 pages of notes that I use to put on these programs, and you are free to do your own research. Lots and lots of good stuff in here. Don't forget, coming up January 11th, January 18th, and February 8th are these success mentoring workshops. They're 5.5 hours long. You get a 90-minute lecture, hour workshop, an hour of one-on-one work, and it is well worth it. You get a meal, you get 2 signed books. Between $47 and $67. There's not a better value anywhere in the United States, anywhere. And what you get, instead of, somebody with successful cosmetic surgery, is you get me and you get my 35 years of experience. You get my education, you get my ability to communicate, you get my ability to listen to you and what you're saying and what affects you. These are small groups, 30 or 40, maybe 50 people at the most. You get a lot of personal attention. We break you up into 8 groups. We select one person from each of those 8 groups in the workshop. That one person will get 15 minutes of face-to-face time with me. Ask me anything, and I will fix your business, your life, your investments, whatever you have going on. I'll give you my very best advice. The rest of you will be privy to being able to schedule that at a later date using webinars or using Skype. We can get that done. There's a ton of value in this. Why am I doing this? Because I'm retiring. I've been doing full-time engineering for the Fortune 500 for almost 30 years. I'm very good at what I do. I've made those companies billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. My patents have sold for hundreds of millions of dollars. Am I happy with what I've done? Yes. I can bring this skill to you. Less than around $50. You get me for 5.5 hours. Just you and me, small groups, a meal, 2 signed books, and a lecture. I promise. You won't experience anything like it, and it will change your life. Go to brooksagnew.com, click on the Success Mentoring link, and sign up today. Tickets are available through Eventbrite. It's a very well-known ticket distributor. Refunds are available all the way up until 7 days before the event, I believe. Maybe it's 7 or maybe it's 30 days. But I think it's 7 days. So not to worry. It's not a huge amount of money. It's a couple of movies and popcorn, and you'll have it. You're there. Books are available on Amazon under my name. Please go to all my social medias. Of course, please share today's YouTube and start a watch party. That's pretty fun, too. This is X Squared Radio. I'm Brooks Agnew saying peace, Earth Explorers.